The Independent has a stunning report on the state of affairs in Yemen right now. They say there is substantial evidence emerging that the Saudis and their coalition allies, including the US and the UK, are deliberately targeting Yemen's tiny agricultural sector in a campaign which, if successful, would lead to a post-war Yemeni nation not just into starvation, but total reliance on food imports for survival. There are already hundreds of thousands of children in Yemen that are starving. And Saudi Arabia is trying to speed that up. Now, we've discussed it. I don't know if anybody else has discussed it, but we've discussed it that it appears like, based on the evidence, Saudi Arabia is attacking civilians on purpose. So they've bombed open-air markets, they've bombed hospitals, they've bombed schools, they've bombed mosques, they bombed everything. By some counts, over 50% of the dead are civilians. So they're doing it, and they're doing it while violating international law further because they're using cluster bombs, which are illegal, and they kill so many civilians, and white phosphorus, and it's just a mess beyond belief. And the entire time that's happening, the West is continuing to arm Saudi Arabia and sit by and sometimes refuel and help them as they continue to bomb these civilian targets. Now we know on top of that, somehow they managed to make it even worse. You'd think that's bad enough, like, oh my God, they're just massacring civilians. Nope, now we know hundreds of thousands of children already starving, and they're targeting the tiny agricultural sector, which is barely keeping the country alive. Let's bomb the little food they have left, as they're already starving and they're on the verge of famine. Now, while this is happening, who leads the UN Human Rights Panel? Saudi Arabia. I mean, way to make a farce of international law and justice. I mean, how grotesque is this? You're undermining the entire system as a result of this. And by the way, I also love the cries about how we need to do a military intervention in Syria to topple the Assad government because they're so brutal. Okay, you are actively aiding and abetting the slaughter of civilian and starvation of civilians in Yemen. If you want to fix a problem, maybe the first thing you do is cut off arms and funding to Saudi Arabia and sanction their punk asses. But no, see, it's not actually about humanitarianism, so they don't consider that for a second. What they want is regime change in Syria, because Syria is aligned with Russia and Iran. So they want regime change to be more pro-US, so then they play up the problems in Syria. Not to say there aren't huge problems. Of course there are gigantic problems, and civilians are being slaughtered. But they only focus on that and talk about that and ignore what's happening in Yemen. And by the way, ignore what's happening in Mali and South Sudan and the Congo and Somalia and all these other places where there are humanitarian crises. But that's not geopolitically useful at the moment, so let's not discuss those. Let's only talk about Syria because, oh my God, Assad's so bad, we got to topple that government. What a sick joke is being played on the American people. People in Yemen are starving in the year 2016, and we're helping it. I'm literally at a loss for words. So action needs to be taken immediately. The Saudi did a blockade of even humanitarian aid. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they were doing it. We got to allow in humanitarian aid. We got to get them to stop bombing civilians. We got to cut off the arms that are flowing to them. We got to sanction them. We got to move in the direction of ameliorating this problem because we're actively moving in the wrong direction and helping the bad guys in the situation. So that's the least we could do, and this is something where we actually can act.